Hi, everybody. How's it going? I am Carolyn Hymas. I'm the Associate Director for Alumnics and Family Engagement, and I work on many professional development initiatives for our Alumnics community. And I want to thank you for joining us for our talk today, Pitching in Entertainment, with our guest speakers, Giulia Caruso and Ki Jin Kim. Both are CalArts alums, and they also teach in the School of Film and Video, and they both have just incredible film careers. I have a couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions during the talk, please share them in the chat, and we will be keeping track of them. If there's time during the presentation, we'll answer them during the presentation. If not, we'll have Q&A at the end, and we'll get to the remaining questions. Also, if you haven't already, please mute yourself so we don't pick up any extra ambient noise during the presentation. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Giulia and Ki Jin to begin.
Hi, thank you, Caroline. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I am Giulia.
I'm Ki Jin.
Very nice to be here. Well, I don't know how much was shared with you about what we do, but we're filmmakers and we work mainly as producers, as film producers. We both graduated from CalArts from the film directing program now a few years ago, and we have been working in film since. For the last few years, we've also been teaching at CalArts, and one of the classes that we teach at CalArts is in the film directing program or in the film video school about pitching. It started as a pitching workshop, and it really is a place to discuss ways for students to learn how to talk about themselves and their work once they graduate, once they leave school, and try to get their projects going in the industry. So that is what we've been doing on our end. We have made a few features, and we have a few new projects in development, and we're currently in Italy, so we're pretty far. But we're very happy to be here, and we're happy that we could make this work with with a time difference. And yeah, shall we start? Mm-hmm. As Caroline said, we have the chat open, so if anyone has any urgent questions, please feel free to drop us a line in the chat. We'll do some pauses as we go along, so if we can get to them as we go along, we'll do that, or otherwise we plan on having some time at the end to do more of like a Q&A portion. Because this is kind of an open event, we wanted to, we're gonna, guess the level of depth that you want us to go at. So I'm sure some of you will find some of the things we talk about, they will be very familiar for you, and some others may not be so familiar. So if you want to know more, please feel free to ask more questions.
For some of the, wordings or vocabularies that we use were too specific. If you don't know what that means, we can also ask that, because I think our topic can be quite specific, because that's what we focus on. I think the whole pitching was actually, we didn't really know much about it while we're at school at CalArts as students, because, I think there's a sort of work itself should speak about you as an artist and, about the vision and all that. But I think we gradually learned it is actually a big part of your launching your career and developing your career as well. You kind of have to be able to talk about what you want to do to get more help and take your career further. So that was sort of the beginning of this the class that we're teaching at CalArts right now.
Yeah, and something that's interesting, because we work mainly in film, something that is interesting is, but I think it's true across very different industries, that pitching is often associated with an idea of selling, right? It has sort of in itself a kind of commercial quality to it. And in Hollywood, it's sort of associated with like a hard selling, pushy kind of attitude. And that was something that for me personally was always very off-putting. And I remember a few years ago, I was in Berlin at Berlinale, and I heard this filmmaker that I deeply admire, Lucrezia Martel, and she was talking about pitching, and she referred to it as, something that only works for movies that are not very interesting in themselves, because a movie that is compelling, interesting, and layered and has depth to it would be impossible to boil down to like an elevator pitch, right? The very quick pitch that you give someone when you have 30 seconds of their attention. And that, pitching comes from the advertisement industry. So it is connected to an idea of selling, to an idea of product. And that was always very off-putting for me until we started by doing the workshop, thinking about pitching as part of our development process and starting to think about pitching as a practice that is more about learning to present yourself, who you are and who you want to be as an artist, and your work that you have done or that you want to be making, rather than trying to sell those necessarily. And also seeing the process of preparing for a pitch, the process of putting together written materials, preparing a spoken pitch, as a way to investigate your work and your project further, as a way to deepen your understanding of what it is that you are doing and that you want to be doing, and ask questions that, to be very honest, are often very uncomfortable to answer. I personally find in my practice as a writer and as a filmmaker that it is oftentimes I tend to avoid some questions that are hard and that ask me to boil down projects to something very simple, to distill them into something very simple. And that is because those questions are hard. But it's been sort of rethinking about pitching as a way to ask those questions and push ourselves to answer, push our collaborators, push our students to answer those questions, has been actually a very important turning point, I think, for us and for how we view this practice of pitching and talking about our work. I mean, it is still pretty uncomfortable. I will not lie, because you are putting yourself out there. You are putting yourself in a vulnerable position. And, anytime that you are sharing something that you care for very deeply, such as, an art project, a movie that you want to be making, you are putting yourself in a vulnerable, uncomfortable position. But if you can take that as an opportunity to actually further the project itself, we find that to be a very constructive way to take something dreadful and turn it into something a little bit more pleasant in the overall process.
Well, I think it's very true. I mean, I was very kind of shy about talking about my work and myself while I was at CalArts as a student. But the truth is, it's a really big part of creative process. It's like, I think CalArts has this culture of discussing and critiquing about each other's work, and you get feedbacks from faculty members. So you actually do talk a lot about your work and yourself. You just like when you flip the idea, like you kind of like you have to sell something, sell the product. I think that's what makes it a little difficult, but it is huge part of it, especially if you are at the sort of like the beginning of your career. Say she mentioned Lucretia Martel. She was already a very established filmmaker. She doesn't really talk about herself or her work at all because other people will just come to her. What project is next for you? That's all she needs. But if you start in your career, you actually have to let people know what you have, what's unique about yourself. So it's on a practical level, it's something that you need to actually think about it and practice. And by doing so, if you keep talking about yourself, which makes you think about what you do as an artist, will just develop your project further and yourself actually challenge yourself and ask questions about yourself, which only make you stronger and better artist. That's how we look at pitching.
I'm gonna start sharing screen so you can see sort of bullet points. We don't have a very in-depth notes up there just because we hope that you will continue to listen rather than read. But you will see that we have, I think you should see the shared screen now. So this is what we just talked about, this idea of pitching as an opportunity to present yourself and your work, an opportunity to learn about yourself and your work, and an opportunity to meet people for future collaborations. This is also something that took us a minute to really, I think, assimilate. It's the notion that, you know, a pitch may not be successful. Many of them are not. Most of them are not. But even though the pitch itself is not successful, even though a meeting doesn't lead to what we were hoping it would lead to, you never know what's going to come out of it. There are endless stories of talented filmmakers who go in for a meeting and it doesn't go well, but then they get called for another project, or some years later, some months later, that person moved on to another company that has a different mandate, and now all of a sudden they are looking for horror movies and they remember back that person that they really liked and they enjoyed talking to, and call them up to see if they are interested, willing, or have a project that may fit what they are looking for. So whether it's about your project that someone really loves, but it's not what they are looking for, that person can still become a supporter, an ambassador for your project, even though they are not the ones who are going to put money behind it, for example. You never know who is going to become a champion of your work. And truth be told, you need all the ambassadors and the champions you can get. So, you know, even a pitch that doesn't have the immediate result you're hoping for doesn't mean it's not going to have it's not going to bring good things for you and the project. Always keep that in mind, because I think, you know, we all go into a pitch, and it's good. You should go into a pitch knowing what you're trying to get out of that pitch, because, you know, otherwise you're all over the place and you are, you know, oftentimes you get lost and confused and you miss the point. You should know what you're trying to get out of a meeting and out of a pitch, but at the same time, be present and be open to what else may come out of it, because you never know. And this is based on a lot of true stories.
Well, I mean, it's not just like, I think, limited to film. I think, you know, music industry, or if you're coming from acting or theater background, like pitching is a big part of that process too in those fields. because it's like auditioning for a role. Maybe I didn't get this role. Next time, a producer or casting director who saw me, who found something in me very interesting and intriguing, thought about me when she or he or they came upon this project. That could be the opportunity that finally comes to fruition. So, across the field, any artistic sort of industry or entertainment business, whatever your focus is, your principle is, I think it's something to think about and keep in mind. And again, practically, you're doing it every day if you're, practicing artist with your collaborators, because you have to talk about what you're doing and you have to know what the point, what the vision is. So in a way, if you think of it that way, I think the process of pitching or the idea of pitching will come a lot easier.
A little less daunting.
Yeah.
Maybe, hopefully. All right. So now we are gonna talk a little bit about how to prepare for a pitch. So this is something that we repeat a lot. The most important thing you can do in preparation for a pitch is research. And it may sound obvious for a lot of you, but you would be surprised how many times, even us, who, we are not big name producers or anything like that, but we do get emails oftentimes. We do have people who come and talk to us because they're interested, they pitch us projects or they're interested in potentially collaborating. You would be surprised how many times people come to us and they are clearly not familiar with our work, with the movies that we have made, with the projects that we gravitate towards, with the filmmakers that we work with. So this may seem obvious, but please do not underestimate the importance of doing your research. And what are you researching? First of all, there are many different settings that you may find yourself pitching in. You may be pitching in a one-to-one meeting where, it's just you and another person, or you and a few people from the same company. You may be pitching in like a forum setting, let's say for film, it's like a film festival, where there are a lot of people in the audience. You may be doing speed dating where, I don't know if anyone has done it, is that dreadful thing where you like sit down with someone. It's literally like speed dating, but you're pitching like 5 minutes and then you stand up, you go to another table, pitch to someone else for another 5 minutes. And by table number 4, you forgot everything about yourself. You forgot everything about the project. And it's just, an awful way to spend the morning, but it can be very useful. So first of all, what context are you pitching in? Is it multiple people? Is it one person? How intimate is it? That is going to affect the way that you talk about yourself and the project, right? If you are doing a one-on-one meeting, perhaps you do not have a full-on presentation with, pieces of your previous work, and you just keep it more casual. If you're doing a presentation at a festival, maybe one day we will be able to go back to doing things in person. You will standing on a stage and you will want something behind you, images to support what you're saying. So first of all, research the context. You want to be prepared for the situation that you find yourself in, so that you avoid being uncomfortable, putting yourself in the uncomfortable position of not knowing what you're going to be facing. The second one, and perhaps arguably most important of them, is research the people that you are talking to. This may or may not be possible all the time. Sometimes you do not know all the commissioners that are on a panel, for example. but oftentimes you do. And when you do, it is your duty to take the time and go through their names, but not only learn, like, do a quick Google search, but try to familiarize yourself with them, with their career, with their work, with what they do, what they gravitate towards. This is so important. And it's not, well, first of all, because it is kind of off-putting on the receiving end when someone comes to talk to you and really wants to work with you on something, but clearly doesn't know what kind of work you do. Like if someone pitches something that is completely out of your wheelhouse, it's oftentimes confusing and it makes you wonder, why they would think of you for such a project, right? The other reason why it's so important is that you don't just want to pitch to anybody, right? You don't want to just, go out with whoever's going to go out with you. You want to find the right match. You want to find, in film, you want to find the right producers. You want to find the right director. You want to be making the same movie. You want to be making the same show. You want to be making the same play, the same performance. You want to be aligned with ideally with whoever comes on board, right? From the producers, the creatives, and your financiers, as much as possible, at least. But if you don't do your research, how are you going to know if they are a good match for you or not? So it's time well spent. It's all on Google. It's all on IMDb. It's all on, interviews and, do some nice Google gossip session and find out as much as you can about the people that you are going to be pitching to.
It's the best way to also break the ice. If, say, lack of a better word, drop or mention some of their work, or, personal connection to that you really admire their work. If you mention them already, it's like a lot easier. It's much more conversational. You can connect with them more easily and direct way. So it's the best way to actually start often the pitching that way. Then the rest becomes a lot easier. And also, one thing I have to mention is that life happens, meaning, you do your research and you go in. It's not what I expected at all. And the person that I researched is not here, meaning you, at the same time, you need to be flexible. You don't rehearse like, verbatim, word, and you just present that. No, I think it's actually more challenging that you need to know the core of what you are doing, what you're really trying to do, your vision. The clearer that you know, the more flexible you can be. So something unexpected happens, it didn't go, or it didn't present itself as you planned, then you can just always go back to that simple, clarified, distilled vision that you had, the core in you. You just honestly present that. I think, that's also on the other side, that's really important too.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the reason why we talk about look, you are pitching to people. They may represent companies, but they're still people. And I think that this idea that, the reason why pitches should be conversational and you should be personable, and why it's smart to do research and watch someone's work and familiarize yourself and find something you like about their work that you can share and that you can, talk about honestly. You don't need to make it up, but we are all humans. There is nothing more, there is nothing that puts you in a better mode towards someone, then a little flatter. Like if someone genuinely seems to respond to the work you do, we all put a lot of time and effort and tears and blood and sweat into what we do because we picked these crazy jobs. So I think that, building that connection on a human level is something that goes a long way. Another thing that is very important to research is comparable projects. Now, there are many, many ways you'll hear about comparable projects in many ways in terms of, comps that you put in like a pitch deck or a presentation where, you are looking for similar movies that say were successful at the box office so that you can make a case that your movie may also, maybe perhaps eventually be successful at the box office. That is not exactly what we talk about, what we mean when we talk about researching comparable projects. It's more about figuring out how your project exists in the world. How does your project exist in the world in relationship to the world, like life, like politics, like socioeconomics, like everything that makes the world. And on the other hand, how does your project exist in relationship to the industry that you work in? Because we work in film, when we think about film or TV shows or series, it's about what are projects that have been made recently or that are being made that exist in the same world. And that is can be a creative story, thematic similarity. It can be, maybe it has to do with the demographic of your characters and yourself and your team. Maybe it has to do with more of like a production mode or the scale that you're working at, the kind of filmmaking practice that you're interested in, the way that the project would be made. Maybe it is because of its target audience, oftentimes, and hopefully it is a combination of some of these factors. But that is a very important piece of research. And why? Because a lot of the film industry for sure, but a lot of, the entertainment industry at large is very reactive. Speaking about film and, series, how many projects out there you see that are based on books, that are based on existing IP, that are remakes of older movies, that are sequels, that are prequels, that are, however many versions of the same story or of the same book you can make. That is because the film industry is a very reactive industry. There is very few people, there are, and they're amazing, but comparatively in terms of statistics, there are very few people that are taking actual risks. And so the fact that you are able to locate your project within this ecosystem and that your project doesn't exist in a vacuum is actually really, really important, because you can find the right, again, that's a way that you can find the right match, and you can find the right supporters and champions and collaborators who are people who are interested in sort of that kind of movie, whatever that means, or in that kind of project, whatever that may mean for you.
Well, I think, us filmmakers often we refer to ourselves as storytellers. I think that's true for many other artists too, whether it's music, they want to tell a story through their sonical experience, or, you know, you can connect with your audience or readers through your words. So we actually do all these things, make and create these things to communicate, connect with someone on the receiving end. Pitching has an audience. The person who's sitting at the other side of the table is your audience. So if you want to connect with them, if you want to communicate something to them, and then you need to know who your audience is. So if you think of it that way again, maybe it's not as daunting as this, you know, so sounds industry like that. So you simply telling the story of you and your project to someone, simply put.
So to continue sort of exploring how to prepare for a pitch, here are some things that, you know, for example, these are materials that we work on with our students in our class. And I think that, you know, this terminology may feel more specific to, again, you know, film and the film industry, but it is very much applicable to a lot of different practices. So, and some of you will be very familiar with this, so bear with us. We'll try to be as efficient as possible. But the reason why we're sharing this is that there are some things that you should have ready going into a pitch. And the truth is that these are things that should become part of your development process. It took us a few years and a few projects and a few collaborations to realize how important it is to have all of these materials at hand and keep working on them and, you know, adjusting them as you move along in the development process, rather than what we were doing at the very beginning, which was focusing on, let's say, the script for a project and leave all of these materials to the last minute when we were submitting for a grant or you know, a workshop or a lab, when we're putting together an application. And we learned that it makes your life so much easier if you incorporate writing, if you incorporate this kind of writing as parallel practice to your creative writing or to your creative practice. So writing presentation materials, writing about your work as part of the development practice is actually very important from a very practical standpoint, because it saves you the headache and the, you know, heart race of doing it at 5 p.m. with a 6 p.m. deadline. But also from a creative standpoint, because you know, oftentimes in asking questions for an artist statement, you learn something about yourself and what you're doing that you then take back to your creative writing. And, you know, the two practices inform each other. So what is generally called, and these are materials that are required for a lot of applications for residencies, grants, financing opportunities, festivals, pitching forums, development labs, you name it. And also that are materials that you will use when you go into, say, a meeting at a company or with a financier or with collaborators, these are materials that you are going to want to share with them too. So a deck is sort of it's also for shows. You may have heard of it as a Bible. It's kind of like an all-inclusive document that has both writing and visuals. It has images, whether they're photos or sketches, drawings, depending on the project you're putting together. And it usually has there are many different ways you can approach a deck, but it usually has some sort of like core elements to it that are going to be very important to include. You can read them. They're also on the shared screen. Those would be a logline, which is a very quick one sentence, very specific description of your project. This is very tight. It is sort of the catchy bite, the catchy appetizer that you would give your audience in order for them to want to know more. Then you have a synopsis, which is a summary of your story. And you can have a short synopsis. It would be, we highly encourage our collaborators and our students and ourselves to have a short synopsis that's like, a paragraph long, and then a longer synopsis that's, say, more like a page long. And the synopsis usually is a telling of the story that follows the character's arc, that contains the main conflict of your story. And it's, a narrative telling of the project rather than, your vision, let's say, for it. Then you have a director or an artist statement, which is what contains more of the telling of the vision. What is your vision for this specific project? Or, what is your vision as an artist, and or what is your vision as an artist at large? Oftentimes something that is really important when you think about a director or an artist statement is that it makes you consider, when we talk about research where your project exists in the world, this is another way to think about, how does your project exist in relationship to your other work? Where does this project exist in your career? What do you want this project to do for you and for your career? Are you at a point in your career when you need to launch something? Are you at a turning point where you're shifting from, documentary to fiction, or you are shifting from theater to episodic series, or whatever it is that, at whatever point you are in your career, it's very important to be very honest and identify where this project fits and what you want this project to do for you as an artist. Then bios, there are some very standard ways to write bios. People have very different opinions about what a bio should be and should do. I like to keep it very simple and very straightforward. And generally, a couple like short paragraphs about yourself, the most important projects that you have made, and kind of like any additional things that you think are worth sharing from a professional standpoint. But keeping it short and keeping it simple, I think, is what I personally prefer. If you have this information and if it makes sense at this stage in your process to share it, or if it's required, you would have a budget, maybe a top sheet or just a breakdown or just a number of how much you think the project, you need to make the project, and potentially a financial plan, which is more of a breakdown of what you already have, where you think the rest is going to come from, where you're going to be looking for the rest, and then contact information. This is sort of the bare bones deck. If you're making a series, you will start adding things, you will start having pages for characters, you will start having pages for different seasons, arcs. If you're making either a movie or a series, you may have pages about the style, the mood, the visuals. But this is sort of like the bare bones materials that you're going to want to start putting together. And then depending on what you are doing, there is more specifics that you'll be adding to it.
Well, most of the cases, if you got a chance to pitch your project to someone, that means you actually, it's assumed that you further down in the development process. At large, the definition of development is up to actually right before you start going into production, you start filming. So pre-production, up to pre-production is called development. And pitching usually happens at the end of the development process. So you are pretty much ready with your development. So say your pitching really went well, and they seem really intrigued by the log line and the story. If your pitching ends there, what they usually will ask at the end of that meeting will be, do you have something written? Do you have a longer synopsis so we can get a full picture? Or do you have a budget already ready? So these items, it's kind of a chain reaction, or as Giulia puts, it's like Russian dolls. One will lead to next. So having everything ready already, kind of it goes hand in hand with your creative process. If you look at each things, logline synopsis, what story are you telling? Who are in your story? Where does the story go? Artistic statement and maybe even lookbook, and the budget. Do you know how you're going to make it? Bios, what have you done? Can I trust you? You can pull that off. So it's all of that. In a way, by the time you actually go in the room to tell someone, you should have this, you should have thought about all this already. So if you think of it that way again, it's quite natural.
Yeah, and oftentimes, a deck will be something that you either share, in the room maybe, or you email after a meeting. So it's something that, should exist and be ready to be shared by the time that you are going into pitch,
Right.
for sure.
While you're sort of like writing these materials, that means that's going to only make your pitching verbally, telling someone about your project much stronger, because you've been asking yourself all these questions that you're going to be asked when you're in the pitching session.
And then you'll see that, on the notes, it says also lookbook. A lookbook is sometimes the term lookbook can be used to describe a deck that has both text and images. But in this case, we are differentiating it as a document that is much more visual, a document that perhaps you may use as sort of like a visual support to what you're talking about when you go into a pitch. Maybe you're pitching again at like a festival to an audience, to a group of people, and you want to have something on the screen that you can refer to in terms of mood, in terms of style, in terms of locations. So it's in this case, we talk about the lookbook as sort of like a much more visual document that accompanies your presentation. And then part of how to prepare for your pitch. As Ki Jin said, you are putting together these written materials. That's a great way to start thinking about some things and to practice your verbal pitch as well. But another thing that you need to start doing at this stage is asking yourself, how can you make your project more appealing? Now, this is a part of the process that is oftentimes in film, at least, referred to as packaging, where basically it's a practice where you attach different collaborators to a project. So if I'm a producer and I have an idea, I have a script, I have a book, I have a treatment, I have something that I want to be, that I want to put out there, that I want to get money to make, that I want to develop, I would start putting together a creative team, right? So I will attach a writer, I will maybe attach a director. Further down the line, or if I already have a director, we may try to attach a cast, we may try to attach a lead, or an interesting role. If there is someone that has a name that can bring, some of you may have heard that this is very common practice in the film industry for movies that are above a certain budget, especially, that you would work with agencies, and what agencies do when they package is they attach talent. So they attach, on one end, they attach creatives like directors, like writers, even producers, but on the other hand, the key element of their packaging process is to attach cast. So they would bring an actor or an actress onto a project that has a certain value that will attract potential financiers. Now, that is very much like a Hollywood industry practice where you work with agents. And it may be, out of that context, it may be a bit of a double-edged sword, because you attach cast, it's an actor that you know, that you like, but when you go to a producer, they're excited about the project, they do not agree with the casting choice, and that may put you in an uncomfortable position. That is true regardless of, especially with cast, when you attach someone, there's always a risk that you may find someone interested who doesn't agree with that choice. So that is a little bit hit or miss. But something that is really important for you to keep in mind is that even if you are doing something on your own, if you're making a project on your own, you can still be thinking about these things. Who are some collaborators that can join you in this process and that would add something to the project because of who they are, because of what they have done, because of their story, because of what this project means to them. Something that for documentaries adds a lot of value and makes the project much more appealing is if there is footage, if there is existing footage, if some of the movie has already been shot, if some of the documentary series has already been shot, or if these filmmakers have exceptional access to their subject, which oftentimes is shown by existing footage. That is a very big asset, having unique access to your subject. Another thing that adds a lot of value to a project is having rights to a piece of IP. That can be a podcast, a book, a song, an existing movie, a short story, a news article, real life rights to someone's life story, whatever it is that you may be interested in and get inspired by. But it's something that adds a lot of value. But another way to think about this that is a little bit more abstract, but it's equally important, especially on smaller budget projects, is what is the story? Not the story that you're telling in your movie, in your writing, in your song, but what is the story around this project? What is the story of the making of this project? What is the story around you and your relationship to the project? Think about it as like, this is a little bit like the stuff that you would share in an interview, right? Or that you'd be interested to read in an interview about something that you really enjoyed. So it's not as tangible, but it is very important. And especially, you know, nowadays with so much content being produced across the board, it is becoming more and more important, and it's coming up more and more often as a question.
Well, for a lot of us who are probably, you know, looking to launch our careers as an artist, in the beginning with the limited resources, this can be a little different, but you can make equally your case unique and strong. Like, I have an access to this group of friends who are part of this unique community because I'm close friends to them. I have really great access. They actually allow me to get in their community with my iPhone because all these circumstances and conditions. I only could film a few hours a day or over the month, over 3 years, every other weekends. That's only that kind of stories will actually make your case very strong. And the material that you gathered and from that process, the footage, it shows really strong filmmaking voice and vision. That's all you need. You don't have to have named actor or famous cinematography. If you think of it that way, the way we often talks pitching about pitching is that what's memorable about how you talk about your project. So what's memorable thing about your process, even if it's really small, independent project that you work with very small resources? What are the things that people would be intrigued and interested in hearing more? That's what Giulia mentioned as what story, what could be the good story to tell in my Q&A or in the article or my interview. Not that you have to go look for those, even if it's not, you know, really part of your process or project. But if there's anything like that, that will make your case stronger.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's like another way to think about it is what is unique about this project. And that's sort of like at large, right? What's unique about it, you know, not only from a creative standpoint, but from the process, from the people involved, and all of these things. All right, so you have thought, you've put together some materials, you have thought about how to make your project stronger, more appealing, and now the pitch time has come. So we're gonna go over sort of like a pitch structure and ask some questions that this is, you know, a guideline, right? This is sort of like a blueprint. It's a roadmap. you may very well take this and throw it all out of the window. But what we have found and learned is that oftentimes using this sort of roadmap as a starting place and going through the practice of answering those questions and having sort of a solid pitch in this way, in this perspective, following these bullet points, then helps us figure out what is it that actually would work better for this specific project, right? So you have a very strong pitch that's kind of solid, maybe not the most thrilling in terms of how you go about it, but that's the very good starting point to then start thinking, well, what if we start with this and then go to that and kind of play around, mess around with the structure.
I think one way to think about it is good pitch. After a good pitch, you don't want to be asked, so can you tell me about that again? In that story point, what happens? You want to like minimize that kind of question after you finish your presentation or pitch. So some of the questions that we are suggesting here is kind of getting those questions, kind of frequently asked questions type of things out of the way. Included them all in your tightly structured pitch. So you don't have to discuss what you already thought you told them after your pitch. Good pitch, after you get all this information conveyed, you want to move on to the next level of questions and discussions about your project. Not these, because they are expected here all in your pitch.
Yeah, and I think that having a structure actually really helps keeping things clear. And yeah, you need to be present. You need to be, reacting and responding to the room and to what's, your audience's reactions to what you're saying. But on the other hand, having a sort of roadmap in mind is actually super helpful to make sure that you are clear and you have something to go back to. So first, the question, the most important, the most daunting. What is your project about? We ask this so much that, it's the question that I personally struggle with the most. And I find it really difficult at times to reply. Because it's difficult. I mean, it's hard to just narrow something that you may have worked on for months and months down to a few words, maybe 2 words, maybe 3 words, maybe 1 word, like boil it down to its nutshell. I mean, it's a very difficult question. It's very uncomfortable, but I think it is the most important question for you to answer. Because once you know that, you can always go back to that answer. Once you understand what this project is about for you, every step of the way, when you have doubt, when you're unsure about something or someone, you can always go back. You can always go back to that answer. And, it will help you also figure out, is this the right match? Is this person the right match for me? Is this the right producer for me? If someone, you talk about the movie and you say, oh, for me, this movie is about the impossibility of love. And the person in front of you says, oh, no, for me, it's about, rebirth. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. We are looking at it from different angles. Maybe that's something that you should unpack and discuss before you go much further, because this comes up every step of the way. I feel like we see it all the time. The questions that come up, it's a question that comes up in the script. It's a question that comes up in pre-production. It's a question that comes up when you're picking locations, when you're being asked to cut scenes. It's the nutshell that you go back to when you are trying to justify why you cannot, lose a character, lose a scene, lose a location because you need to cut your budget. If you can argue that because this is the essence of the movie and this character is so crucial to that, you have a much better chance of not losing that scene that you love. It's interesting. Like, I am working on a project right now that in a way is very close to me, and I had a hard time pinning down what the project was about. And I shared the treatment with someone who is a very talented writer, and talking with her and hearing her feedback, she sort of gave me as feedback, she told me what the project was about. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I wasn't able to articulate it, but she said it and it was perfect. And it must have been there somewhere because she gathered it from what I had shared with her in terms of, what I'd written. But it was very interesting to me because, it is a very hard question. It's a very hard question to answer for yourself and to be the one in charge of answering. But sometimes maybe it doesn't have to be all on you, the responsibility of answering. So when you open up a conversation around that with your collaborators or with people you trust, they may also give you some good solutions to that question. You don't have to be alone answering it. But I mean, basically, it's like, this is like the essence of the project.
Right. Since Giulia mentioned earlier about Lucas Martel, she probably also doesn't like the idea of kind of boiling down to what your project or her project is about. Maybe she'll see it as a very reductive thing again. But a lot of cases that we've encountered and experienced, the opposite in the creative process works a lot more efficiently, meaning if you keep this abstract idea all the way through, I know what it's about. I can't just articulate. Maybe it's a great thing. Maybe it should be that way. It's hard to distill because your project is so complex. That's a great thing. However, when you feel lost or when you creatively feel like you're stuck, oftentimes simpler, more clearer essence, as Giulia was saying, helps you to layer, make it more complex, sophisticate, to add to it. It's a lot sort of easier process, we found out too. So if you think of it that way, it's also creatively practical question that if you have this answered for yourself, the rest of the creative process will become, again, a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think it's also true that, in our experience as producers, we have found that when we struggle, when filmmakers struggle to answer that question, it's when the development process, the writing, and the financing, and sort of every step of the way, things are most difficult. For some reason, the inability to say what the movie is about for the leader of a project is very difficult for the rest of the collaborators to be pushing the project along. So that's also something to think about. And also, in the context of a pitch, it's something you can always go back to if you get lost within the pitch itself. Like, if you know what the project is about and you get sidetracked and you lose focus, you can always go back to that and kind of, find your way through the pitch again. So oftentimes you would start your pitch by saying what your project is about. what is the essence, what is the big beautiful idea that you're working on.
The whole picture.
What is the whole picture? Then sometimes when a story is very personal, or when it has, a special story, like it's based on a true story, it's based on a book, or any sort of underlying material, you may, another good way to start the pitch is also to kind of conversationally segue into your inspiration, your discovery of this piece of work, and what excited you about it into making this project, what inspired you to make this project. Or another way to think about it is, again, what is unique about your project, what elevates it. And it can be a number of things, right? It can be your inspiration, as we said, but also you're capitalizing on the strengths of your project. It can be that this is a series adaptation from a podcast that you did, or it can be that there is a special relationship with someone involved, or special achievements of someone involved. Anything along those lines can be something that you open with. It's like, oh, this is the feature version of my award-winning short film. It already frames the project in a certain way that is compelling and that makes your audience want to know more. So this is often a great place to either start or end your pitch, right? Where you would put the things that you want them to grasp on or remember at the end. For the sake of clarity, at the beginning of your pitch, you want to talk about what it is. Seems super obvious. So many people forget about it. Do you want to make a podcast? Do you want to make a web series? Do you want to make a feature documentary? Do you want to make a short film? Do you want to make a live performance? Do you want to make an interactive music video? Whatever it is that you want to make. Do you want to make a video game? What is it? Seems super obvious. So many times it's forgotten, and it's the most confusing thing when that piece of information is missing, because someone may be listening to a whole pitch with a different idea of what you're talking about for the whole time. Then once you've sort of provided this frame, this very important framework, then you move into the more narrative aspects. What is the word? It's sort of the when and where of your project. It can be very simple, but also intriguing. Also, it should be to the point. What is essential and special about the world that you are creating that your audience needs to know at this point?
Or for certain genres, this is really important. Say your project is sci-fi or horror or period, then you have to actually specify, otherwise it's going to be very confusing hearing your story. Oh, that doesn't sound right. Or it's set kind of like, a world that exists, we already know, but there are certain rules that the audience needs to follow that's really crucial to the plot or story, then you need to also introduce that. So big part of the world is actually kind of explaining, setting up those things for the audience at this point in your pitch, the person who's interested in your project.
Yeah, and I mean, you'll hear us say this a lot probably as we keep going through, but it is all about what is the minimum amount of information I can give to intrigue, but not, overwhelm the listener. Because really what it comes down to, how to pitch, is this very fine balance between giving enough that it's intriguing, but not giving too much that it's confusing. And, you know, it's something that we all learn through practice. And it's something that some days works better and some days works less well. But it is a very fine balance that, especially in these questions, you really need to think about, in terms of like, how much do you tell your audience about this world that you're creating, for example. Similarly, who is the story about? You know, who are your characters? Who's your protagonist? Who's your antagonist? Who do they need to know in order to be able to understand the story? We don't need to know about everybody that's gonna appear, or that everybody that is somewhat relevant, right? Who are the people that you need to introduce up front? Maybe it's just your protagonist and your antagonist. And then there are secondary characters that come up that are introduced as they become relevant, as you go more into the story. But again, very fine balance. What is the minimum amount of information? Intriguing, but not confusing. And then next, what is your story? What is the story that you're trying to tell? Again, you want to keep it simple. You want to keep it straightforward. We usually tend to think about it as driven by character, in terms of what is your character's arc, what is your character's struggle, what is the key conflict that you're dealing with in this project. And then you sort of like identify a few turning points for your main character. That's a way that makes the telling of the story in such a succinct manner that makes it relatable, right? If you give a similar way, then when you're writing a script, for example, you want your audience to be able to hold on to something, to grasp onto something, to connect to something. So thinking about your story from the perspective of the character is going to be really helpful to provide an emotional thread for your listeners. And, we are storytellers, so the overall pitch should feel like a story, right? Should have ups and downs, and it should have emotional moments that your audience can sort of latch onto. Once we've talked about the story, you may want to include something about the mood, the style, the point of view, perhaps if it's genre, why is it genre? What's your take on the genre? And then any additional technical information regarding, say, how many episodes you're thinking, or what is the potential to expand this universe. Maybe you talk a little bit about, from a more marketplace perspective, what's the target audience for this. Maybe you don't need to go into that in a first pitch. Maybe it's something that you let them ask you. But as you go through all of this, you'll start to read it and say it and rehearse it, and then you'll start figuring out what things feel redundant or too heavy or unnecessary, or sort of like are stopping your flow.
There's also kind of, everyone is different artist and has different voice, and as a pitcher, when you pitch, everyone's different too. Even, sometimes we could pitch as a team, then we actually divide and conquer, meaning I think we have different strengths. Giulia has really strong writing background and she really enjoys it. So she naturally tends towards telling the story and excited about the character, but I am also very intrigued by how it's going to be visualized. So that also, I work as a cinematographer too. So I have that interest. In a way, all of these questions, you can also think of it that way. What excites you, as Julia was pointing out? If something excites you, that could be really a strong point. What makes it unique? And that leads to the last thing, last question. You. Half of your pitch is actually about you, and it should be about you. It's not just only about your project. So the way you talk about, the way you present yourself, the way you share your ideas in a unique way, that really matters. And oftentimes, maybe it's a little bit messy presentation, but if you have really strong presence, or they can tell that you love this project, you have to tell this project, or you have, a great passion for it, personal attachment to it, and you're very charismatic. And if people remember you, that's actually half of the success. Which is also to say, if something really doesn't fit for you, or doesn't feel right for you, I think it's something you can also adjust, meaning you can focus on what excites you a little more, because we are different artists and pitchers. You don't have to try to answer all this and cram into one pitch. If your interest and strength and what makes your project unique is actually a visual approach and how you're going to execute it, you can actually dedicate a little more time towards it too. But again, which means you need to know how you're going to do it, what excites you, and what makes you want to make this project. If you're clear, they'll hear it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of, yes, you're pitching a project, but you're pitching yourself. And also, when people support your project, they are supporting you. And it's really important that you persuade them, not only in relationship to this project, but in general, at large. And as much as you will be thinking about what are the strengths and weaknesses, what's unique about my project, you are going to be doing the same thing, thinking about yourself, right? So while on one hand, the way you talk about yourself is, more practical, where you can't assume the person in front of you knows anything about you and what you've done. So you may want to make sure to mention, a couple of things that are important to you in your career, a couple of successes that you may have had, if you don't know them, or if you're unsure whether or not they may have read your bio, for example. There is also a lot of work that you'll be doing on yourself, about yourself, a lot of questions you'll be asking about yourself that are more about what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are the things that you enjoy the most in pitching, in filmmaking at large, in your artistic practice at large, so that when you are talking to these people, you're then able to articulate why are you the best person to be making this project, what excites you about this project, how do you understand this project and this world that is unique and makes you the best candidate for it. And this is, it's not an easy thing to answer and articulate. And that's why oftentimes we go back to the idea of what is the project about, right? Because if you're able to articulate what a project is about for you, then this question of why are you telling this story? Why are you the right person to be making this project? Why should we trust you with this? They're all sort of connected. All right, so we've gone through this sort of pitch structure. Again, take it or leave it. You may never end up really using that kind of pitch when you're actually pitching to someone, but having, whether it's this or a version of this, having a blueprint, a roadmap that you use to structure your pitch, we believe it's incredibly useful, even as a starting point to then scramble everything around and mess it all up and have a much more creative approach to your pitch. But at least you will have sort of like the bones of your structure will be there for you to then use however you see fit. So now on to, we talked about structure. Now we're gonna look at how to pitch in terms of your delivery, right? So the actual how to pitch. Ooh, sorry, getting ahead. First of all, despite everything that we have said, pitching, even when you're pitching to a number of people, even when you're standing on a stage, you are still talking to other people. It is still a conversation. Of course, the smaller the group of people, or when it's a one-to-one meeting, it's much easier to think about it as a conversation and a dialogue. But if you're able to think of it as a conversation, you are then you're able to be much more present and much more focused on what it is that you are saying. And at the same time, for me at least, it helps me remember that you're still talking to human beings, right? So in the moments where you get lost and you sort of, go off track and don't remember what you were gonna say anymore, it helps to remember that those are people in front of you, and very likely what excites you, it's going to excite other people too. That is something that I think is, again, something very, very basic and very simple, but we oftentimes forget that if you got super excited about something, it means that there is something there, and there will be someone else out there that will get just as excited. So if you're able to keep that in mind and convey that excitement, like Ki Jin was saying before, then that's the most important thing in a way. On a human level, you're able to connect on a human level. Also, because the people in front of you are people, there is a very primal, instinctive, the first response to a pitch, I think, is actually very primal and it's very instinctive. So if you're able to connect on a human level, if you're able to appeal to the person in front of you on an emotional level, then I think you have established a connection that is, in that moment, much stronger than a more analytical or logical approach, for example. Because at that point, you are connected as people and you're sort of taking them, they're much more willing to go with you on this journey of what you're about to tell them. Then what we already talked about, context, do your research, know the situation that you're pitching in and also the person that you're pitching to. Make sure to do your research and think about your pitch in relationship to the context, both of the situation and the person you're talking to. The way you're going to be pitching to an audience going to be quite different from the way that you're going to be pitching on a one-on-one meeting. The way that you pitch to a financier is going to be different from the way that you pitch to a cinematographer. So be aware and do your research and be mindful of the context that you're pitching in. Then the next is seduction. It kind of goes along with this idea that you are creating a human connection and you're appealing to your listener, to your audience in this sort of like primal level and very emotional level. You want your listener, your audience to want to know more. So that calibration of giving enough, not giving too much, giving just enough that they're going to want to know more, giving just enough that then they ask a lot of questions in the whatever time is left for them to ask questions at the end of the pitch. That is really the fine balance that you want to have. You're seducing them with an idea and then you want them to want to know more. You want what you told them to sort of stay with them, to linger with them, so that they will then ask you for the script, more information, whatever it is that the next step would be. Next, again, going along with the idea that this is a conversation, listen and react. Now, there are people for whom it's really difficult to sort of like be very present in a pitch. There are people that just find it much easier to have a script, rehearse the script, go with the script, stick to the script, get it done. And if it works for them, good for them. But we find that, I personally find that it is much easier to actually be effective with a pitch when you're able to listen to what the audience is responding to, what your listener is responding to, and react accordingly. And also, when you are present that way, you're also able to sort of get out of pitching mode for a second, connect on a human level, say, share a laugh or whatever it is, depending on what you're talking about, and then go back into it without being too fazed by this distraction. So it does take a lot of practice, and you may not get there until a few projects down the line and a few presentations of the same project down the line. But it is actually something to, a goal to have, to be able to be present, listen and react on the spot in the moment. I mean, a lot of actors do that. It's very much part of their practice too. So I think it's kind of similar in a way of how performers are asked to be, present in the moment.
Well, I think it kind of relates back to the flexibility that I mentioned earlier. And, if you know clearly about these questions yourself, you should be able to adjust depending on how the listener is reacting to what you're talking about. I've seen some cases where they come, deliver, that's all they want, they just want to get it done. There's some questions, they don't even listen. They couldn't even listen and answer the question because they just want to deliver. That's actually not really a great thing to happen. So in a way, I think you should relax yourself and be more flexible and go with the flow. That will make you actually more confident than forcing the confidence in you. Again, everyone has different presence and different energy. So if you're forcing your confidence, that's also not a great thing either. So whatever sort of like manner that fits you, find that and stick with it, be yourself. That will bring out more confidence in your pitch.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing with confidence is that, you know, when confidence borderlines arrogance, it's not great. So it's, again, a very fine line, a very fine balance. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of the industries that we all work in sometimes don't seem to really perceive that fine line between the two, or are attracted to arrogance. But I mean, the truth is that, you know, you want to be confident, you want to be excited, you want to be passionate. You don't want to be arrogant. You still want to be, you know, you want to be confident. You want them to trust you, but you still want to be able to listen to what they are saying, right? To what the person in front of you has to say, without like shutting them off. So self-assurance, yes. And, you know, a financier is going to want to know that you're going to be able to pull this off. But also, I mean, this is also a question of the kind of practice that you want to have and your own process, and, you know, your goals with this project, your goals with this pitch. We personally like working with people we like. So that is a very important piece of the puzzle for us, for example. We want to connect as people, and we want to like each other, and we want to know that if we spend a bunch of years making work with someone, that we will hopefully still like each other at the end of it. So not everybody thinks that way. Not for everybody that's a priority. So that's also something that when you are thinking about yourself, your practice, and the way that you work and want to work, and the kind of projects you want to be making, you need to be very honest with yourself. What are the priorities, and what are the things that you are really looking for, or that are most important for you? Again, we said it many times already, convey what you love. If you love it, likely there is going to be someone out there who loves it too. Likely there is going to be someone out there who's going to be inspired by the story that you were inspired by, excited by the characters that you were excited by. So that is contagious. So don't be shy with sharing what and why you love something. Have fun. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know that it is really possible. I find like, okay, it's, you know, have fun as much as you can. I think, you know, the reason why we say have fun is also don't take yourself too seriously in doing this. I mean, it's difficult, and oftentimes a lot of money is on the line, but, you know, if you take yourself too seriously, you're gonna hate every second of this. So in a way, try to have as much fun as possible.
Well, you know, I think the last couple of points, that they're kind of all related. I think best way to have fun is actually conveying what you love, and that's best way to prepare yourself. I think, you know, good pitching memories I have, or we have, it's at the end of the pitch, or when you leave the room, actually, you feel like, oh, I actually, when I was telling them, I was excited. You know, it's you telling a story to an audience. I think that's the best way to think about it. The few pitching or presentation from kind of known directors you can find online. I can think of the Andrew Stanton pitching the Finding Nemo, because Pixar uses pitching as the selection process for their next projects usually. So all the directors and writers actually get to pitch the entire company. in his case, also James Wan pitching Aquaman, it's not actually kind of proper pitch. So he does a lot of things that you shouldn't do it that way, actual pitching situation. But you can just tell he loves what he's doing. Every single word, every single bit, every single thing, the way he talks about, he's just excited about everything. So you actually kind of like, oh, if he's that excited, I can watch that movie. You feel it, you feel that energy. So that's kind of what the last couple of things in the delivery that we're talking about.
I mean, I think to wrap it up and then we open it up for questions, but I think ultimately pitching really is about preparing as much as you can, knowing as many details as you can about what you want, what you're looking for and what you are trying to do, so that then you can go in and tell the people in front of you very little about all of that and make them want to know all the rest that you already know. In a way, I'm not that gossipy, but I really love gossip as a form of communication. He's laughing. I really, really love gossip as a form of communication. I'm very fascinated by it. And I think that there is something about the way we gossip that is ultimate pitching. When you start telling a gossip to someone and you're like, oh my God, have you heard a story about blah, blah, blah? And it's basically you're teasing it, right? Every step of the way. And so that is maybe a fun way to think about gossip, to think about pitching. It's gossip. All right, we're gonna stop sharing the screen. And I guess
we have a few questions that came in the chat during the presentation.
Yes.
So I'm gonna work through those first, and then we'll pick up any that come into the chat as we're going through the Q&A. So the first question is, why is it called a deck?
Why is it called a deck? That actually,
I think it may be from printout word, where it was like if you print it out, it's like a deck of paper that people would hand out. That would be it's a bit of a leftover. That would be my guess. I would not quote myself on that, but
it's changing these days. But when people started using the term or actual document, show Bible, it was actually very thick because it included really extensive character description, synopsis, long version, short version, each scripts for each
a
episode.
deck of slides. Yeah, that's a deck of slides or a deck of printed out papers.
I think that makes sense. It totally would make sense that it would be called a deck, even though times are changing now. The next question, let's see, it says, for the bio, as a writer/director, do I need to have a history in festivals with multiple short films or self-produced features before I can pitch a feature or a TV series?
I mean, it's interesting. There is a moment with your bio where you're going to start taking stuff out and you're going to be very satisfied with that process. And there is a lot of time, there is a bunch of years where you're just going to put everything in your bio. And that's my experience. Like for a few years, I was just adding everything to my bio because there wasn't much yet. But the more you do, the more work you do, the more festivals you go to, the more you're going to start then taking stuff out and stripping it down to only actually a handful of things that are more relevant and whatever it is that is most exciting, impressive, call it however, or meaningful from a professional perspective. I don't think you need multiple short films. You could have one film that you have made, or you could have experience in another field. If you look at directors making their first feature or their first show, you'll see that there is a lot of, I would say a lot more cross-contamination of like people who start in music videos and then at one point, move over and make a feature, or people who make commercials and then move over and make a feature without having had that sort of narrative. In fact, Kogonada, who we worked with, didn't really have narrative experience before making Columbus, but he had been working, he's been doing a lot of essays, and was quite well known for his film essays for Criterion. And then from that, he made his first feature. So the answer I would say is no, but whatever it is that you're good at and passionate and enjoy making, then you should make as much as you can.
And the pitching a feature project and TV is quite different actually, because it's two different nature and kind of different industry too. And it will also radically change who we're pitching to. For TV, so-called showrunner or creator, they play really big role in the creation of the piece. So it's a little different. So I think that's kind of like two different paths that you need to think. Not that you develop one of them, but when it comes to pitching, it's something, two different ways of approaching it.
All right, so the next one is, in the electronic press kit, if a grip or a production assistant has an interesting filmography, should we also mention it? Like if a PA has a stronger filmography than the director and the DP and the art director?
I would not. I mean, from an industry standpoint, you would consider the team that you include in your deck would be sort of like the creative team. It would include like a director, a writer, producers, key cast or lead actors if you have them, maybe your DP, maybe your production designer if they have a connection to the project, if they're meaningful in some way. But any sort of below the line crew at the stage of pitching, I wouldn't include, because the truth is that if this person is working as a PA on the project, unfortunately, they're not going to be contributing creatively as much, nor probably did they creatively contribute to the other projects that they PA'd on. So it's not really an asset in terms of what it adds to your project. So I would stick to sort of like your core creative team and leave anyone else out.
Okay, so the next question is a two-parter. So I'm going to ask part one first, and this might be something that we need to send in a follow-up. But do you have any concrete examples of a pitch, or would you be willing to share one of your pitches that you've done for a project?
And as far as like a deck, like a written thing?
You know what, they didn't specify, so let's go with it. Yeah, let's say a deck.
Let us think about which one could make sense. You could also find a lot of them online. So you can, if you think of shows or projects or movies you like, I would encourage you to do a deep Google dive and see if you can find them, because we have in our in the last couple of years, found, looking for references, found quite a few of them online.
That's very solid advice. So the second part to this question is, how do you find collaborators to pitch to? Who are we pitching to? And do you find these people doing cold calls?
How you find collaborators depends what collaborators you're looking for, meaning if it's a DP, it's going to be a little bit different than if it's a financier. And it depends what kind of project you're working on. Generally speaking, a very good place to start finding collaborators is film festivals and film forums, sort of generally speaking, places where there is a community of filmmakers and organizations that foster sort of like early career filmmakers, like in LA is like Film Independent, Sundance, or now called the Gotham Institute or something like that, former IFP. Tribeca doesn't really exist anymore, it's unclear, but you know, there are institutions that foster sort of early career filmmakers, and there are also a lot of companies now or organizations that are also focusing on specific demographics, like that are focusing on female filmmakers, on filmmakers of color, on Asian American filmmakers, LGBTQ filmmakers. So, you know, there is a lot of resources that way out there. So I would encourage you, that's a good starting point, at least, to find sort of like-minded collaborators and start putting one foot in, and then going from there. Festivals, forums are also very good.
The next couple of questions that came in the chat were kind of similar to that. But there is one part to one of the similar questions that I want to go ahead and ask. So I'm going to read the whole thing, but feel free to just kind of jump into the second part that was a little bit more specific. How do we find people to get pitch meetings? And are any going to be willing to take pitches for TV shows if they have no TV experience? So i.e., if you have no TV experience, how do you find people in television to hear you out?
We don't personally have much experience pitching TV. We have heard stories. We've grown more interested in the topic, and sort of I have asked friends who are more talented and successful than we are. It's really hard. I mean, we're in a very particular time right now between COVID and the streamers and sort of the voracity that people are consuming content, the rate that people are consuming content at. So a lot of companies may be more open and flexible to pitches because they are really looking for stuff. They're all looking for new stuff. But episodic TV is very, very difficult. If you have no experience, it's actually really hard. Even if you have some experience, say as a feature filmmaker, it could be hard to transition into TV and get pitches for, say, an original show if you don't have a strong showrunner attached. I think Ki Jin mentioned it earlier at some point, but it seems like TV, even with streamers, series are very much still driven by sort of like showrunners. So if you can attach a strong showrunner, then that will open a lot of doors. But if you're alone out there, it may be really, really difficult and really time consuming to even get to meet with someone.
Well, if you look at the sort of the creators of TV shows that you like, if they look at their past work, it's 90% probably they have writing credits, meaning TV world is very much driven by writers. It's writers' world. So it also requires a slightly different sort of track record in order to get your foot in. That's also part of it.
That's pretty good advice, I would say, on that one. Thank you for sharing your guys' expertise. Moving on to the next question. Have you ever pitched for commercials?
Somewhat, yes, a little bit. It's not our, we have made some commercials. We haven't really pursued it as much. I don't know if because there isn't much time just available to do everything. It is quite a different world. Because we usually on commercials, we have interacted as producers, which is quite different than, say, if you're a director going in to pitch for a commercial. So that's a little bit different, but we have gone through the process a couple of times. Yes.
Well, because commercial world also has ad agencies that when the project comes to you, it's pretty much kind of ready to go. You basically kind of hire you to execute it, meaning there's not a lot of creative decisions that you can actually make an input or make a decision on your end. So it's a slightly different type of pitch. What you need to let them know is a little different as well. Also because we're producers, I think what we also need to present is different. But that's also the world that people will look at your track record, how many commercials they've done, what companies, what clients they had, that kind of stuff will matter.
But we have pitched directors for commercials, and we were on as producers. And so in that process, the directors had to put together a pitch that was not unlike the written materials that we talked about. A version of that, I guess. Very visual, as you can imagine, but they did put together something along those lines that was then shared with the client, and we narrowed them down. We sort of functioned as a producer's agency, so we were pitching the directors, and then they narrowed it down to a couple. We had an interview, they picked one, so that was kind of the process.
All right. So the next question is it necessary to get an agent to get a pitch?
No, you don't have to, but it could open doors for you, so it helps.
Yeah, agencies, it's a kind of a whole conversation on its own. I mean, depending at what stage you are in your career, if you feel like you're at a point where an agent would really open doors for you, then that may be super helpful. Oftentimes, agents work with bigger clients and, work on bigger budgets. Just if you think about the way agents make money, they make money on percentages. So they are gonna wanna work with people who can, if they get 10% of that person's salary, it's a meaningful amount of money. So yes, agents will open a lot of doors. They will get you a lot of meetings and they will get you a lot of pitches. Doesn't necessarily mean that they will lead to something. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you are in a moment in your career, and I don't know you personally, this is not personal, but that's what you need. So yes and no, I guess.
Alrighty, so the next one is, what do you do to calm your nerves just before pitching?
Interesting question. Breathe. I don't know. We don't have sort of we used to smoke, we don't anymore, so that's gone.
Well, I'm one of those, I have a script that I want to deliver, then I get too obsessed with it. So I get lost in those words and letters. So in a way, the more distract myself from the pitch itself, the better result is. So I think I tend to distract myself doing something else, not thinking about the pitch.
Also, drinking water is good because then your mouth, you're more fluid in your talking.
Okay, so the next, I think that's good advice for anybody doing any kind of speaking. What does it take to start a production company? a lot of money? And should directors consider it in order to produce their own films?
What takes to start a production company? A lot of money? No, because we didn't have a lot of money. But what we had was great collaborators, friends who we admire as an artist, who we like to see their next films. That was our biggest asset to start with.
Look, I think you need to think about, I mean, there is a production company and there is the production company, meaning there is the idea of a production company, which is anybody can give themselves a name and say they have a production company. And then there is the pain in the ass of having a production company where you need to file taxes and do all that stuff. So I think you need to differentiate between those. And you know, why do you want a company and why do you need a company? That would be the question I would ask. You don't need a company to make work. Oftentimes it's a pain in the ass to have a company because, you know, you need to make money not only for yourself, but also for the company in order for the company to make sense and exist. So I think the question is, why do you want a company to begin with? And also, are you a producer or a director? I mean, you see a lot of directors or talent who eventually at one point in their career start a company, and that's usually when they get a deal with someone, say with Amazon, with A24, with Apple, whatever it is. They open their company with the deal of either a first look deal or something, multi-picture deal that comes from their existing success, right? So those are very different ways of thinking about a company. I don't know if for us having a company necessarily made a difference in our trajectory as a feature producers. It was meaningful in the commercial work we did, because we were able to do that work through a company, because the company was actually an existing and a working company that had insurance, that had, you know, all of that good stuff that's annoying and costs money and it's really boring to keep up with. So that's, think about why you would want a company, I guess.
So that's actually all that came in for the questions.
There is one that I was very curious about. Someone said, I have written 3 children's books.
Oh, I missed that one. Okay, let me go back.
Middle grade novels in a series.
Yes, you are right.
I don't want to make those books into a movie. I want to have a studio do it, which is very interesting. I'm very interested in literary IP now, and I'm very interested in children's books. So I don't know from the author's stand. I don't know if this person has an agent, or perhaps with the publisher. They could send it out to film agents or to companies, where you would send, say, the book for their consideration, and then once, you know, someone reads it and is interested, they would contact you. I'm not quite sure, but I guess if this person, Mary, has an agent, I would definitely think they would be the ones who would connect. I know a lot of agencies have their lead agents and you know, talent agents, and they sort of have different branches within. So they would very easily take a project from one part to the other. But if you're on your own, I would imagine that you could send it to companies or producers or even directors that you think are could be a good match, explaining, you know, why you think that.
So one more question came in about production companies. And that is, what are the advantages of having a production company?
I mean, from a practical standpoint, if it's a working, like an actual working company, then you can take on projects, say like commercial projects or series or stuff like that as a production company, and using the company for those projects, right? So if you have existing insurance, you can take on, let's say if you have insurance, you can take on, and a certain infrastructure, then you can take on certain projects that otherwise as an independent producer may be complicated from a legal standpoint. Like, I don't know how you would do it as sort of without the support of a company.
I mean, the question that needs to be asked is actually not starting a company, because you can literally start a company today at your laptop, but it's how do you build your company, and what are you building the company for is the actual question, because it will take, it's like a sort of company needs an identity, like a artistic vision, everything that we talked about today for the company. So it takes a while to actually develop all of that. So it's a commitment, and it comes with the practical sort of lots of work. So it's something that the decision that you need to make and ask why to yourself. Why is that necessary for your artistic practice?
Okay, also we got one more that came in. When pitching to friends/studios for feedback, how careful do you have to be about copywriting your material? Is that something that you should be concerned about?
I mean, I don't know that you would pitch to studios for feedback. I think if you get a meeting with a studio, you're pitching for money, not for feedback, just as a general approach. You know, generally speaking, you want to be careful in terms of, you know, if you send out a script, you generally want to put, to watermark it with the name of the person you're sending it to, so that if they send it out to someone else, you know, and it leaks, you know who sent it out. The truth is that these days, I personally find that a lot of people obsess over this. And in certain circumstances, it's actually really distracting to have, say, a watermark across something. So that's sort of not always a great solution. Yes, someone said you can register the script. Yes, for sure. So once your script is in a good place, then you can register it with the WGA. But you know, if they are your friends, if they really are your friends, I doubt that they would, you know, take it and steal it from you. But if you're concerned, why not? If it makes you feel more at ease, do it.
All right, we are out of time. We're at 3 o'clock. So Giulia and Ki Jin, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to share your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.